my friend Patricia playing with the with the 3D model. Okay, so that's the practical access. We got that out of the way. Okay, so the ideal body. So the main issue of the show was the ideal body, which sets up the norms, the fantasy of the ideal body, which, as much as they are beautiful, also create an impressive norm that actually does not exist. It also sets up what different bodies are up against and how disabled and queer are looked at as not fully women, not fully men, not fully human, and are stigmatized. But Leonard Davis, the disability studies scholar, has written about the Venus de Milo. This was a great shot. You walked into the exhibit, and down the hallway, the first thing you saw was the Venus de Milo. So Lenny writes, "She has no arms or hands, although the stump of her upper right arm extends just to her breast. Her left arm has been severed and her face badly scarred, with her nose torn at the tip of her lower lip gouged out. Fortunately, her facial mutilations have been treated and are barely visible, except for minor scarring, visible only up close. The big toe of her right foot has been cut off, and her torso is also covered with scars, a particularly large one between her shoulder blades, one that covers her shoulder, and one covering the tip of her breast, where her left nipple was torn out. Yet, she is considered one of the most beautiful female figures in the world." Okay, so the second section of the exhibit we called Saints and Sinners, and it went through the Middle Ages, where impairments are considered either a divine punishment or the devil's work or a special distinction. Talks a little bit about same-sex desire was considered sin in the Christian sphere of influence, and that homosexual acts are sometimes punished by death as sodomy. So you'll see as I go through this, the histories of queer histories and disability histories, they run parallel and they're very similar, but they don't really start to cross with each other and intersect with each other until the 19th century with eugenics, and then really comes together during the Nazi period in the 30s. So this, in Saints and Sinners, the show we were doing with this show it was a history show, but we used the contemporary art to comment on this history, and that was really the focus. All the texts were on these black tables, wheelchair height tables, beautifully the stuff was not foiled on it; it was imprinted on the tables. It was really beautifully done. So I'm going to play Claire Cunningham's video that was part of the show, which is about her her performance, "Reason to Live." So I just want to read a little bit about Claire, so you know who gets some context. So Claire Cunningham creates and engages in multidisciplinary performances. Give Me a Reason to Live was created when Cunningham was one of 5 European choreographers invited to be part of the project Bosch 500, commemorating 500 years since the death of painter Hieronymus Bosch. In this interview from the 2016 Perth International Arts Festival, which includes some performance excerpts, Cunningham says she was shown a sheet of sketches of beggars and cripples, and I'll let her speak for herself. So here's Claire Cunningham.
Give Me a Reason to Live was actually created out of a project that I was invited to be part of, which was looking at the work initially of Hieronymus Bosch, who's a medieval painter, and the 500th anniversary of his death is 2016. And I was invited to be part of a project that was 5 emerging choreographers from across Europe to look at this work and make a performative work in response. And one of the earliest things in the project I was shown was a sheet of sketches from his studio. They were all beggars, like 30 beggars, and they were all cripples and identified as cripples in the text, in the writing on the sheet. So all the beggars are cripples and all the cripples were beggars. That was the role of disabled individuals at that time. So either as beggars or minstrels, really ways of surviving. And the academic who showed us these sketches issue straight away, but I became fascinated by that potential reading of disability as being related to sin. And further, he suggested it might even be symbolising greed, which was quite surprising. In terms of the physicality that's explored, there is a real journey from what it is to be sort of pushed down or oppressed. When is a bent over posture kind of representative of oppression, and when is it penitent, which would be seen as a good thing in a Christian context, And also, I guess, within the actions that I decided to investigate was this question about belief again. Again, like guide gods, a question of what it was to believe in something, and whether even as a physical practice, what it is to investigate that feeling of belief. And also for me then, there was also the issue of, my medical condition is osteoporosis, which is degenerative. Although I've had it since birth, but the reality is that my bones will start to degenerate quicker. And usually it kicks in at menopause, but my bones are already weaker, so it will start earlier. And there was a question for me of, have I pushed myself as far as I could when I could? So knowing that my bones will start to degenerate potentially earlier than many other people, where the work is kind of a big shift for me is not only in the type of material that I've made, but also where previously my work really, I think, was about showing what I could do, and I've spent my life trying to show how good I am at things, is that this work is also showing what I can't do, and that the reality as a disabled person and in other kind of marginalised identities is that you have to prove how capable you are, but also show your failings, also show what you can't do in order to prove your validity, or to prove the validity of your claim to the support that you need to exist. And that's something that I've not shown on stage before, is actually what I can't do. And what I can't do is stand for and also there are always questions around whether I really need my crutches. People are quite confused by by my capability. Ironically, this is not an autobiographical piece, but it's probably the most literal bare portrait I've made of myself so far.
Yeah. It's really interesting. So to give you an example, we had the video screen like in front of where I am.
Here's a brand new,
below
better
it
way to sell your
were
house.
the actual
So if you're
Bosch-
thinking about selling anywhere in or around Ottawa,
Yeah, it's okay. Were actually the Bosch drawings and some other representations, the Bruegel picture of quote-unquote cripples and beggars. And so we had that very famous art there, but what was featured was Claire, and talking about this piece that was based on Bosch. What some people don't know, but I know because I know the piece so well, is that when there's a part where she stops and she starts changing her clothes and stuff, and it's actually a reference to Action T4, which is just amazing that she put that into that piece. Okay, next. So then we moved on to the Renaissance portion of the exhibit, which is called The Power of Depiction. So basically, I'm going to just read a little thing and then show you two pieces, including Riva's. So in Renaissance art, the Greek ideal reemerged. Physiognomy was prevalent, composed of the Greek words for nature and judge. Physiognomy is a belief one could judge a person's character by their outward appearance. A famous example, Shakespeare's Richard III, whose disability was not extreme in real life, became a symbol of evil. In art, idealized bodies were celebrated, while disabled people were portrayed as objects of fascination, scientific research, or as figures of fun. Even today, physiognomy continues to reign. For example, villains in movies are often disabled. Disability studies scholar Vicki Lewis writes, "Consider the ease with which good and evil can be portrayed by the addition of a hook, a wooden leg, or an eye patch. Introductory screenwriting manuals even recommend that aspiring writers give their villain a limp or an amputated limb. But today, a true counter-narrative is emerging. Queer disabled artists celebrate their bodies and their lives. So this is Chicago artist Riva Lara, her self-portrait called 66 Degrees from 2019, shipped all the way from Chicago for the exhibit. She also had some other work in the show. So Riva, in 1997, Lira began Circle Stories, a series of portraits of disabled artists and academics who explored body issues in their work. She says the circle of the wheelchair is the nearly universal symbol of disability. The wheel transforms the ordinary object of the chair into a mark of physical and social difference. Circle Stories charts the existence of a community of disabled innovators who work to redefine disability in the 21st century. In the self-portraits, this is my words, in the self-portrait 66 Degrees, Lara places herself in a natural, though imagined landscape, displaying her back and often hidden site of impairment to the viewer. So that's a okay description of it. So there's Riva's piece. And then next is the photograph, which I must say now is in my living room because I bought a print of it. I couldn't live without this anymore. So Joey Sullivan describes his photographs as portraits featuring both joyful queer expression and a deep well of despair. Antidepressants and his hospitalizations inform his disuse of color to focus on a monochrome world of foggy limbo, suspending reality in each frame on purpose, focusing on questioning form. Aaron Orby in The New Yorker writes, "The viewer's ogling becomes an occasion for Solomon to magnify the overlooked pleasures and pains of our tender and dysfunctional species." In portraits of his friend, photographer Robert Andy Coombs, Solomon asserts paralyzed bodies as libidinous beings. In one portrait, he and Solomon appear shirtless in a dormitory. The armrests of Coombs' wheelchair have become the prongs of a forklift, guiding Solomon into bed. Solomon's images grant his subjects the sexual identity they are so often denied. Solomon lets his lens objectify the men, their faces crane away from whoever who would gawp. So that's Joey's thing. He's a wonderful spread on the New Yorker in Joey a few years back. He's really young. He's like in his 20s. Okay, so then we moved on to the Enlightenment, which we called perfecting. So the Enlightenment brought to the fore two major ideas. One is the idea of freedom and equality. The other is the belief that reason should be the standard of social and political action, that scientific rationality could perfect society by solving all of its troubles and creating an ideal society. Both concepts were paradoxical, since the vast majority of people were excluded from rights and considered incapable of rationally using their own minds. Columnist Jamel Bowie writes, "At its heart, the movement contained a paradox. Ideas of human freedom and individual rights took root in nations that held other human beings in bondage and were then in the process of exterminating native populations. Colonial domination and expropriation marched hand in hand with the spread of liberty, and liberalism arose alongside our modern notions of race and racism." In the curator's words, "Today we are still enmeshed in the Enlightenment paradox as we struggle to perfect society based on less exclusive ideas." So in this very interesting exhibit, which really my co-curator Birgit moved together, really brought together, we also talk, it was also a time where deaf schools began, and the whole idea of whether deaf people should sign or use, learn to speak like quote unquote hearing people. And so that is also featured, but that thing would take, there's this wonderful 30-minute video of the wonderful artist Rita Mazza that was featured there. But what I'm going to show you here is Pelanakeke Brown's two of her prints from Grasp and Release 2019. Hard to read the things, but they're basically medical records that are blacked out, and in the white you see the words that she's created, almost, found poems. So Pelanakeke Brown is an interdisciplinary Samoan Pākehā artist. Her practice spans visual art, writing, and performance. She was part of the performance festival at Sophiensala. The prints of Grasp and Release were created after she received her medical file in 2018. Brown describes these work as fragments of her excavation process. She says, requesting this information about myself felt subversive. I created dance scores from my life to access the text, break into it, take ownership of its words. Words which were mostly foreign, cold medical terms with occasional surprising glimpses of the humans involved. The little girl and her, my beautiful mother, and the difficult journey she had. And then the curator's words, interventions to alleviate or cure disabilities are common, sometimes necessary and helpful, but sometimes harmful. In Grasp and Release, Brown reclaims both her body and the text written about her body. So here we have the Enlightenment, and we have the juxtaposition with KK reclaiming her words and recreating her own version of her own kind of freedom. So then we move into the 19th century, where things start to really coalesce in the two histories. So enforcing resisting normalcy, this is a still from T.J. Cotthand, First Nations Canadian artist. It's a still from her video Madness in 4 Acts in 2008. And I would say that we partnered with the Prinzhorn Collection for this exhibition. The Prinzhorn Collection is one of the world's foremost, I don't know what to call it anymore, patient art. In quotes, we could have a whole discussion about this. And we featured some of the queer works from it, from there, and presented those whose work was shown as artists. There was no mention of diagnoses or things like that. And so right across from that was TJ's video. There was 2 videos, but this included. So during the 19th century, medical science increasingly gained power. Methods were used to measure humans and define norms and normality. The concept of the homosexual and the disabled entered the lexicon. Same-sex desire, gender nonconformity, and disabilities went from being characteristics to identities, leading to both community building and stigmatization. Scientific, in quotes, efforts intensified. Eugenics popularized a new set of beliefs and practices for the improvement of society. People were classified as carriers of desirable or undesirable traits and supposedly inherited traits. Reproductive and sexual behavior was to be controlled so that undesirable traits were bred out by preventing reproduction. At the same time, however, new movements emerged against such repression. People with disabilities, queer people, and feminists fought for equal rights as well as sexual and reproductive self-determination. Okay, next. So here it comes, the dark heart of the exhibit. And it's sad because Elizabeth Sweeney, who's highly featured in this exhibit, was supposed to be here today, but she was ill. And it's unfortunate, but that happens. So I'm going to read you the text on that we had on this thing, which this area we called elimination, which I call the dark heart of the exhibit. It literally was in the middle of the first room. On January 30th, 1933, the Nazis took power in Germany. Soon after, eugenics became law. Eugenicist Ern Haeckel's belief, politics is applied biology, was realized. Queers and the disabled were increasingly persecuted. Some queers and numerous disabled people were forcibly sterilized. By 1945, about 400,000 people were sterilized against their will, according to decisions made by hereditary health courts. Disabled children were registered and sent to hospitals for special care, where they were experimented on and killed by injection or starvation. On September 1st, 1939, Germany invaded Poland, the beginning of World War II. The Nazi government commenced the Action T4 program, and a few months later, the mass murdering of disabled people in gas chambers began. In 1941, after the official end of Action T4, the murders continued by both gas and other means. The disabled, like other groups viewed as weakening the Reich, were deemed useless eaters and unworthy of life. Now, what's not shown here is There is a group of drawings called the sterilization drawings by Wilhelm Werner, who was sterilized and then killed in Action T4. And it's one of the few extant artworks by somebody that actually went through the experience of sterilization. They're absolutely incredible drawings, and we had 4 of the original drawings in the exhibit. I was just absolutely thrilled. My husband Mike could tell you, when I actually went to the Prinzhorn collection and saw them, I was like, I couldn't believe that I was sitting in front of them. But let me tell you a little bit more about Elizabeth Sweeney. Elizabeth is a visual artist, arts researcher, and curator. She is also neurodivergent queer of Acadian settler descent who grew up in rural Nova Scotia. Sweeney says about The Unrelenting, her 3-part project that begins with a large black triangle hanging outside the museum, which I'm about to show you. Many of us must still fight against sanctioned shaming, segregation, and persecution. The symbol of the black triangle, a badge used by the Nazis to label, shame, and persecute a large and diverse group of people, intends to mark both a taking up and a taking back of space around the Schulz Museum. It is a call to those who live with these labels, especially those who historically are called the neighborhood home and have been displaced by its gentrification. And the curators envision all of us who pass the triangle to reach the exhibit joining in solidarity with the Black Triangle community, free of shame and stigma. So you can see the 2 triangles. They basically, one is in German, one is in English. They're all these words, the bad words that everybody uses to call the socially deviant. And then you see the tray below that, filled with the black triangles. They were takeaways. You could actually take away these from the exhibit, these smaller triangles with the words, some in German, some in English. We put them also at Sophie and Salwa during the performance festival to use the synergy there. The next slide, there's a close-up of Elizabeth's, The Unrelenting. And there's the black triangle hanging outside the museum. I thought it would never happen. I called up Bergen and said, I want to hang Elizabeth Sweeney's black triangle outside the museum. I thought you'd say, oh, we can't do that. She said, oh, what a great idea. And it was there. We should say that the museum was shot at during the exhibit, not because of the exhibit. It's a queer museum, so occasionally people take a shot at the museum. The German press gave no attention to the exhibit except when the things were shot. So now there's a hole in the felt there. Okay, the next slide. So this is a very, very, very special story, queer disabled story. So during the course of curating, and anyone that's ever curated an exhibit knows a lot of things happen by chance, we encountered the story of Hans Heinrich Festersen, a queer disabled man who was killed in Platzensee prison in 1943. And it was an article that our researcher found. And lo and behold, one Saturday morning, I get a call from Birgit and says, we have the Festersens' letters in the Schwules Museum archive. And I said, what? She goes, I know, isn't that just crazy? And so we actually had the documents, we had all this stuff in the archive. So let me just tell you a little bit about Festersen. You could also read an article that I wrote about the Festersen story on Zocalo Public Square. But Hans-Heinrich Festerman's parents, Friedrich and Sonja Festerman, ran an art pottery manufacturer at Lutzaustrasse 31 in Berlin that was very well known in its time. His mother came from Minsk and was Jewish. Festersen was disabled after recovering from polio as a child. The Schwules Museum collection houses a small bundle of 5 letters from Hans Heinrich Festersen in Platzensee prison to his sister Ruth Maria. The oldest preserved letter is dated December 14, 1942, the last one May 22, 1943. The letters testify to the close relationship with his sister and her 2 sons, Bobby and Peter. It gives an insight into everyday prison life, including his requests for day-to-day items such as a toothbrush or shoe polish, as well as lovingly rhymed poems for his 2 nephews. There are also some passages about the progress of his trial. The letters were given to the Schwules Museum by Peter Festersen, so his nephew he was writing stuff to in the early 2000s. And then we included an audio collage compiled from the letters, so we let Hans Heinrich Festersen, 1903, 1943, to have his say. It's really it was really an incredible part of the exhibit to have these documents and these letters be a part of it, because it really brought the disability and queer history together. And in this article I write about, was he killed because he was disabled? Was he killed because queer? Or does it matter? So that was something there. So I just wanted to say that as we're talking about eugenics, I wanted to talk a little bit about the coronavirus and how that brought eugenics back to the surface. Triage protocols were startlingly based on eugenics. In the US, the protocols of some states did not allow the treatment of those with developmental disabilities. In New York State, those who use ventilators in their daily lives could be forced to give them up in the hospital, so those viewed with more of a chance to survive could use them. Flippantly, people started to say during the crisis points of the pandemic, the world became disabled. And this is simply not true. The non-disabled world simply used adaptations long used by the disabled, including virtual connection. But as soon as the pandemic was deemed finished, these adaptations, which disabled people had asked for and were constantly rejected, were no longer useful. Masks have disappeared for the sake of getting back to normal lives. Once again, normal treatment for the disabled is exclusion. It was as if a wider narrative was playing out, which is a familiar narrative in movies and literature. A disabled character is there to educate a non-disabled character. Think of the movie Rain Man, for example, if not to win an Oscar for a non-disabled actor playing a disabled character. So I just wanted to put that in. We required, though the mask mandate had ended, we required masks being used by everybody who came to the museum, because we knew we were going to have a disabled population as an audience, and we wanted to create a safe space for them. Okay, so then the exhibit moved on into the second back room through a hallway, and when the performance artist Perel did an art intervention, they said, the hall, which becomes a time machine, because basically like a time tunnel, because we go from this dark Nazi history to the three icons that we focused on. And so you see, this is a picture of Raymond Hogue, the performer. I think I have the other ones. Yeah, there's Lorenzo Botner, and then Audre Lorde. But let's go back to Raymond Hogue. I know time is getting by, but I want to play the Raymond Hogue. It's not there.
No, that is there. That was not there.
Yeah, we were going to do that, find that online, weren't we? We weren't. It should be on the thing. It's not there, we'll just skip it. But if you get a chance to watch it, oh no, we put it on there because it was not the link, it was from my copy of it. Let me just tell you a little bit it's really too bad, because it's really just, and it's no longer online. I looked to see if it was online, but I had a copy of it. Raymond Hogue was a dramaturg, he was a writer, and then he was disabled, and he decided that he wanted to basically, to quote in this wonderful video that we can't show, he wanted to put his body into the fight, quoting Pasolini, Pier Pasolini, the writer and Italian filmmaker. And he started to do these incredible performers with a troupe, in which he was the only disabled person, but we will let him go for that for now. And what was really interesting is Perel, who I just mentioned, did that intervention, also had some work in the exhibit, and Hogue came to the Art Institute of Chicago, the school where Perel was studying when they were a younger artist, and made such an influence on Perel. And that was in the label was about that. We had Perel quoted about what that meant. So in the exhibit, there was this cross-generational mentoring, inspiration from previous artists, which was very, very important to have. Okay, so then we'll move on to the next. So then we had the last part of the exhibit was called Freak Out, Birgit's wonderful title. It was basically about the disability and queer rights movements post-World War, mostly in the US and Germany. So this is the thing, and then we also included HIV/AIDS, and I'm going to read you some of the text from this part of the exhibit. We're almost done. Though disability rights groups in the U.S. began forming in the early 20th century, by the 1970s the disabled mobilized as never before, showing that societal barriers, both physical and attitudinal, were the cause of disablement. Their message thus resembles that of Rosa von Braunheim's iconic film, "It is not the homosexual who is perverse, but the society in which he lives," a film from 1971, which kicked off queer liberation in West Germany. Inspired by the U.S. Civil Rights Movement, the disability rights movement adopted strategies of civil disobedience with provocative actions demonstrating disability not as an individual fate or medical problem, but a socio-political issue. By reclaiming the words crip and even freak as a source of pride, we have also reclaimed power. Much has been achieved to remove social barriers and improve cultural representation, but there is still much to be done for us to be truly equal participants in society. So keep freaking out. And then there was a small section that was based on the work of some contemporary artists who live with HIV. And the text, I think, was important. The outbreak of the AIDS pandemic in the early 1980s confronted queer communities with illness and death. Because governments initially ignored the growing crisis, which pervaded mostly marginalized communities, self-help organizations and activist groups such as ACT UP, the AIDS Coalition to Unleash Power, developed from both health education and protest models, significantly using the expertise from those affected. Initially, AIDS was viewed as the gay disease, with gay men stigmatized as symbols of death, as disabled had been for centuries. A generation, including many queer artists, was lost. AIDS activism put the sexual and civil rights of chronically ill and disabled people on the public agenda, significantly contributing to anchoring them in the public consciousness. Today, HIV/AIDS can be treated, though not cured, by medications, which, however, are out of reach for many. This pandemic is not over. So this is a work by Charles Ryan Long, an artist based in Chicago. He's a multidisciplinary artist, activist, and Black liberationist exploring issues of representation, legacy, and loss through papermaking, print, performance, and other media that lend themselves to the principles of the democratic multiple. The varied work of DDF is at the intersection of art material and call to action, bringing attention to the AIDS epidemic specifically amongst gay and bisexual men and the ways that they navigate or don't safer-sex negotiations. That was Charles's words. Long reminds us that your language is important and challenges the use of the dirty, clean dialectic that leads to stigmatization of those with HIV. In the patch, Dirty and Proud, echoing the silence equals death political poster from the early years of HIV/AIDS, he refashions the pink triangle, transforming stigma to a source of pride. And he also has these great playing cards, these trading cards called Play Safe, which were packaged with condoms and lube to raise awareness on HIV/AIDS Act. It was really wonderful. So this is one of his iron-on patches, Dirty and Proud. Okay, so pointing to the future, so we had a little part about what's called disability justice. In 2005, the disability justice movement was initiated by Patty Byrne, Mia Mingus, and Stacey Park, queer women of color who felt excluded from the disability rights movement, disability studies, and by ableism in activist spaces. Working in the San Francisco Bay Area, they focused on the intersectionality of disability and ableism with other identities and oppressions such as race, class, and gender. So that's right there. We had a piece on that. And then we ended the exhibit with the fabulous Canadian artist Cyrus Marcus Ware, who is a scholar, visual artist, activist, curator, and educator. Using painting, installation, and performance, he explores social justice frameworks and Black activist culture. Ware's multi-channel video, Ancestors Can You Read Us? Dispatches from the Future, is an imagined and staged dialogue with a future beyond the current epoch of Black social death and insecurity, and this time marked by the ever-present capitalist forces of greed and the persistent script of police and state violence. Back to the curators, Ware's video provides sustenance as queer disabled people continue to find power both in society and our individual lives. And I'm going to let, as we did in the exhibit, let Cyrus's short video have the last word before we have a Q&A.
Do you read me?
Do you read me?
Do you read us?
Can you copy?
Can you copy?
Do you read us?
Whoa, can you read me? Grandchildren, we have a message for you. Can you read us? Can you copy?
We have a message for you from 2072. We are your great-grandchildren.
We have a message for you.
The first thing we want
to say is that we love you.
Is that we love you. It was because of you that we survived 3 generations past what was predicted.
It was because of you that we were able to stop this ravage of the earth, our mother. We were able to stop this ravage of the earth.
The atomic age has moved
forward at such a pace, the language of atomic warfare.
The atomic age has moved forward at such a pace, the language of atomic warfare.
Do you read us? Can you copy?
Do you read me? Can you copy?
The second thing is, we want to warn you. We want to warn you.
You told us how to build this technology to contact you, to act, to rebel, to take this earth back from the capitalists.
You told us how to create this technology to contact you.
So we can tell you to act. To rebel.
Because one woman said, I have had enough.
To take back the earth. Take it back.
To take back the earth from the capitalists. To find self-determination and freedom.
Black people survive
Black people survive because of you. Because of your actions.
It's not too late.
We want to thank you, ancestors. We love you.
We love you, ancestors.
We thank you. Thank you, ancestors. End transmission.
End transmission.
Thanks. There's one.
Oops.
One
Is
other
this
thing,
actually-
there's so the website of the exhibit, I think I have the URL. Yeah. This is where you can find the English version of the website for the exhibit, and you can find videos at my YouTube channel. But you just put Kenny Friesen YouTube, you can do it. Yeah. So.
Lovely. No, thank you so much, Kenny. I mean, this is so interesting. And I'm sure there are folks that maybe have questions. And I know that we have this mic. I think we might have a mic stand. If you raise your hand, I can come to you. It's whatever you'd like. But this is a great time. If you have questions at all for Kenny, I'm sure you wouldn't mind taking a few.
Yep.
Okay, so anyone at all have some questions? I can always start. I don't want to take up the space, but yeah, Kenny, I mean, I got a chance to see the exhibition in Berlin, and I had a tour of it. I was wondering, like, did anything happen when you watched people moving through the space that, was disconcerting? Did you see anything that was problematic, things that gave you pause, or things that were unexpected that really you didn't anticipate when you put it all together?
No, I mean, I didn't. I mean, the thing I always remember is almost every time I went into the space, there was a visibly disabled person there. I mean, there might have been, people with invisible disabilities, but that I never saw at the Schwillis Museum before.
And did you do, like a lot of museums, you have feedback cards and things, and did you have a chance to read some of them?
They had, I mean, I had a meeting after the exhibit was before it closed. The feedback was really just astounding. It was really, really astounding. And I mean, it was really interesting is that I was told that usually the parts of the German military book tours of the Schwillis Museum, which I found to be very intriguing, they actually came to see the exhibit. There were workshops that the education person did that were really, really interesting. They came up with these posters. They did a lot of stuff that I didn't even know about. I hadn't seen the exhibits. Last time I saw it was in December of 2022, and it was supposed to end at the end of January, but it went to the end of May. They estimated around 10,000 people came to see the exhibit. And I know that the people came in groups from Amsterdam. Somebody in Halifax who teaches at King's came up to me and said, "Oh, I went to the exhibit twice when I came to Berlin, and my whole class is all about your exhibit." I mean, I just keep having this experience. This exhibit just seemed to really hit a nerve.
Wow.
Yeah.
Yeah, we have a question. I get to play game show host.
Hi, thank you so much. I just wanted to know, what did, curating this exhibition teach you about curating art in general?
That I maybe shouldn't have done it. It was not easy to do. We had a very limited time. We had a very nice budget, but we only had 6 months from when we got the funding to when we opened the exhibit. I spent 3 years of doing collaborative projects, and at the end of that, I had enough of collaborating for a while. I really just wanted to go back to my own work. I have a way of telling a story, and I mean, I've always seen, though I had my co-curators, the real idea for the exhibit is mine, and I feel sometimes it was a three-dimensional version of my mind, and so it was strange in that way, but what's really I came out of this with was really something is that, when you do work, as we do work in our lives, we feel good about it, but there's always something wrong or whatever. This was the perfect show for me. I just had I came home after the opening, which was very overwhelming. I hadn't really been in public because of COVID, and there was 400 people at the opening, and I came home and I turned to my husband and I said, I always do these things and they go on and they live, but then I move on. But this time I really did something. I really, really did something. I guess I was really surprised at how we worked to create, dare I say, a home for queer disabled people for the time that the museum was up. And that I didn't know, I didn't know that happened. Another surprising thing is Birgit, who really has the more relationship with the museum, she told me that people come to the Schwillis Museum to learn about queer history. And what's so interesting about this exhibit is they learn about queer history from a completely different angle that they never thought of before. So it filled that mission, but in a completely different way. And I felt very, very good about that. But it's hard. It's a hard work because, and luckily, the production manager, the build-up of the show, it all happened. I could tell you crazy, really nutty stories about the Venus de Milo and how we got it. It cost more money to get it from across Berlin than it did from artwork from Chicago, and stuff. But it really was I learned a lot. I learned a lot about. The Festerson story was the real amazing thing that I knew nothing about before the exhibit happened. Most of the artists I knew. I did discover a few in the process. But yeah, it was quite a thing. To me, it was a novel. It was writing a book. It was writing a narrative. Yeah.
I guess just thinking about how we use storytelling as a means of creating resilience and also representation in curating and storytelling. I was wondering about your perspective on developing takeaways that do continue to carry that outside of the room. I really thought that the Dirty and Proud patch was kind of an interesting and fun way of critiquing that, and I was just wondering if you had any words of advice or I guess reflections of considering what we should do when we're creating takeaways that we want people to actually reflect on those topics to bring home with them.
I think it's the same when you write like an op-ed or an article for a newspaper. It should be about one thing and get the message across easily. There's time for subtlety, of course, in life, but when you're thinking about a takeaway from, think about Elizabeth Sweeney's takeaways. You're basically taking away a black triangle, which is a symbol of what happened to some people during the Nazi period, with words that are still used today that have the derogatory meaning. And so people are actually literally taking it with them, which is an interesting thing. And so what they do with that, I would love to know where those went. Like, what did people do? I've lost mine twice. I had, originally Elizabeth did this in Toronto, is where I first saw it. And interesting, which I didn't mention, is that the area around, what's the Drake Hotel? The Drake Hotel just had a very similar history to the area around the Schultes Museum, and it worked really wonderfully. So I think for the work, simplicity, without being simple, is a good thing to somebody to take away, and think about what the message you want somebody to have when they take something away from something. Does that answer your question? Yeah.
You said yourself that about every 10 years you come out with a book. Are you on track for a 2027 book? No.
No, I'm in year 11 with this book already, and yeah. It's that means excerpts have been published and it's still not finished. It's me and the publishing world don't get along very well.
So fair.
So yeah.
Anyone else with questions? Oh, perfect. Yeah. Sneaking over here.
Thank you. I was amazed by how rich, creative, and thoughtful the collection has been. And I'm also amazed by the approach that you use in order to encounter history. That made me remember, the work of David Mitchell and Sharon Snyder, and The Word Without Bodies, the film that I usually show in my class. And when I showed the film and had a discussion with students, usually the reactions were very different. Some students really engaged with that, and some felt that really difficult to absorb. And I realized that you approach that from a very different perspective. And you also engage history, but it's very different from their film. And how do you see your creation and your curation create a different way of resisting or speaking back to the ableist ideologies that continue to play out nowadays?
Thank you. It's interesting, when I told Birgit what I wanted to do, I think she thought I was like, what are you talking about? And then when I gave the first presentation of how this would happen, she said, oh, okay. And she added a lot of things, like we had the original for a very long time, the titles were the Middle Ages, the Renaissance. And then one day she said, we have to change these names. And we, on a phone call, on a Zoom call, we just changed the names. And having heard, I was the one who carried the queer cryptness, because I am both queer and disabled. Birgit is queer but not disabled. Kate, the assistant curator, is disabled but not queer. And our researcher was queer but not disabled. So I was the one that held the whole caboodle. And I couldn't have done it without them. Birgit really did the whole freak out section. There's a wonderful whole wall filled with the history of the disability and queer rights movements, with an emphasis on Germany. It was just really amazing. and she it's hard to say who did what at one point, but she really brought together the part on the Enlightenment. I mean, I was the one, I didn't know how to make it all fit together. It was an incredible, really difficult experience, but it was incredible. Something don't know if I would do it again, but I'm really glad I did it. Yeah.
I think that's actually a really beautiful, a really interesting idea to end on. And maybe what I would just add, as someone who saw the exhibition and then, with you all got a chance to hear you speak to it, something that came to my mind was just the incredible internationalism of this project, of the artists in conversation with one another. I mean, Cyrus is well known in Berlin queer and trans of color circles. And so I think maybe in an era, a moment where, walls are being built and nations are being reinforced, that maybe we create a space for international dialogue and listening to each other better and more effectively. And I think your exhibition really helps us do that. So let's maybe give one more round of applause to Kenny. And I also want to take an opportunity to thank Amanda and Sarah for signing, interpreting for us today as well. So let's give them a round of applause as well. And we have food still here. So if you're hungry and you didn't get a chance, please take it home with you. And thanks so much for coming. It was really great to see everyone here. Thanks so much.